Well, we're joined now by Jeff Reichert, a documentary filmmaker who's out with a brand new film. It's called Gerrymandering, and it's on a very timely, very important issue, one of those stealth issues that we don't hear a lot about. And I just want to ask you, in making this film, what was your general sense of people's knowledge of the redistricting process, the gerrymandering process, and what it means for American politics?
I think most people really are almost completely unaware that this happens. Most folks don't really think about the fact that they live in a district. I know before I started making the film and thinking about it in 2003, I didn't really think about, well, I live in a district, somebody has to draw those lines, there are implications to that, somebody chooses who gets to be in the district and who gets to be in other districts. And as we went across the country and asked people from Iowa to DC to California and Florida and Texas, what do you know about gerrymandering? Most people just, the most common response was, Jerry who?
He was actually a real person.
Gary.
As you know.
Yeah,
Gary, yes, from Massachusetts. One question for you, though, Jeff. We're now headed into a midterm election where it looks like one party's going to lose more than 20 seats again. This will be the third election in a row. Does that suggest that maybe this gerrymandering thing isn't so determinative if, in fact, we can have wave election after wave election after wave election?
I mean, but we can look at that and say, would the waves have been bigger had the lines not been drawn the way they were? I mean, I actually faced the same question in 2006. We were in the thick of thinking about the movie and what the implications of gerrymandering are. And then all of a sudden the Democrats retook Congress, and that wasn't something that everybody predicted. But I looked at it and I started looking over the districts and looking at the numbers, and a lot of Democrats won these Republican seats. But if the lines had been drawn so favorably across the country in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Florida and Texas for the Republicans, I think there's a good chance the Democrats could have picked up more seats from that. But there are also really serious implications at the local level, besides who controls Congress in terms of redistricting, but what happens in state legislatures and communities.
And as you point out as well, some 2/3 of lawmakers actually have nothing to worry about in this year's elections, in large part because of the way these districts are drawn. But I want to ask you, there are a couple of ballot initiatives out there, one in California, right, another pair in Florida, that would have major implications for the way the districts are drawn in those states. Do you get a sense that we're seeing a tipping point, or that more states are starting to move in the direction of taking this responsibility away from the lawmakers who could benefit from it?
Yeah, at least I hope so. Proposition 20 in California it could be a great step for the state. They passed Proposition 11 in 2008, which we document in the film, and the idea there was to take the power to draw state legislative districts away from the legislators, which I think is a great step. Prop 20 extends the jurisdiction of the Prop 11 Commission to cover congressional districts, and I think that is the best way to see how an independent commission could work for a state, because then you're dealing with all of the major districts at once. In California, though, they also have Proposition 27, which would disband the Prop 11 Commission before it even has a chance to start working.
It'd be a lot of fun if they both pass, actually.
Right, then you figure that out. Although, is there any concern that there's a law of unintended consequences here? You take it out of the legislature, you put it somewhere else, and yet maybe we don't get districts that happen to be more representative?
Yeah, that is entirely possible. And that's part of what makes democracy democracy, is that it's always going to be a little messy, it's always going to be a little sloppy. And to a certain extent, we should embrace the sloppiness. But I think we also, at the same time, need to look for these kinds of conflicts of interest. Because I think, what we have now with legislators drawing the districts isn't really working for anybody. And so I'm in favor of the idea of, let's see if a group of citizens who are carefully screened can draw districts that work better for a state like California. And if it doesn't work, let's try something else. But I think the status quo is kind of untenable at this point.
In the meantime, Jeff, this is going to be the first round of redistricting since that mid-decade redistricting in Texas, the Tom DeLay map, where they drummed out 5 Democratic members of Congress. What do you expect this time, where some 18 states are either going to gain or lose members of Congress in all likelihood?
I mean, I think, we're going to see obviously the continued move of seats away from the Rust Belt and the Northeast to the South and Southwest. But what's interesting about a lot of that move is that, especially in a state like Texas, Texas is predicted to get 4 more seats.
Right.
And I think the Republicans are, they're kind of chomping at the bit, thinking about what they can do with this new representation in Congress. But I think given the Voting Rights Act protections for minorities, I can't see how they don't end up drawing at least a couple of those districts in Texas to represent Latinos and elect Latino candidates. And I think you may see a similar kind of situation in Florida and Arizona. So, even though Republican, quote-unquote, red states are set to gain, I don't know if that necessarily is going to translate into increased representation in Congress.
All right, Jeff Reichert, the new film is Gerrymandering. We appreciate you being with us. A big issue for 2010, Amy.
Thanks a lot.
Big issue going into 2012 too for the electoral college.
That's right, for the electoral college.
And it continues.
Has big consequences.
That's
it for this edition of Topline. Twitter.com/Rick Klein, Twitter.com/Amy E. Walter. Gerrymandering, yes, it was actually even older than Elder Gerry.